If you grew up in the 90s, you remember a world without smartphones. You remember going outside to find your friends. You remember waiting a whole week for the next episode. And psychology says that shaped you in ways. Today we're diving into the psychology of 90s kids, what makes them different, why they think the way they do, and how growing up between two worlds changed everything. People who grew up in the 90s are unique. They're the bridge generation. They remember life before the internet took over. But they also adapted to the digital world. Psychologically, this created something called dual world fluency. You can hold a conversation face to face without staring at your phone. But you can also navigate social media like a digital native. You experienced boredom, real boredom, where you had to create your own fun. No endless scrolling. No YouTube rabbit holes, you had to use your imagination. Say this built something crucial: creative problem solving. Because when you're bored with nothing to do, your brain doesn't shut down, it creates. That's why 90s kids often have this entrepreneurial, DIY mindset. They learned early, if you want something, you figure it out yourself. Here's something 90s kids had that's almost gone now. Delayed gratification. You wanted to watch your favorite show? You waited until 8 p.m. Saturday. You wanted to talk to your friend? You called their landline and hoped they were home. You wanted to know something? You looked it up in a book or asked someone. Everything took time, and you learned to wait. Modern psychology shows that delayed gratification is linked to better emotional regulation, higher success rates in life, stronger self-control. Because when you grow up waiting for things, you learn that not everything needs to be instant. Compare that to today. A video buffers for 3 seconds. People click away. A text takes 5 minutes to reply. Why are they ignoring me? 90s kids grew up in a slower world, and that trained their brains differently. They can sit with discomfort longer. They can wait without panicking. They don't need constant stimulation to function. And in a world obsessed with instant everything, that's actually a superpower. But here's where it gets complicated. 90s kids are the most nostalgic generation. They romanticize their childhood more than any other generation. The music, the cartoons, the simpler times. Psychology calls this Rosy retrospection, the tendency to remember the past as better than it actually was. And here's why it happens. The 90s weren't actually perfect, but they were predictable. You knew what to expect. Life had structure, routines. Now, everything changes every 6 months. New apps, new trends, new rules. The world feels unstable, chaotic, overwhelming. So the brain does what it always does when it is stressed. It looks back to a time that felt safe. But here's the problem. Nostalgia can become a trap. When you spend too much time looking back, you stop moving forward. You compare everything to how it used to be. And nothing today ever measures up. That's why some 90s kids struggle to adapt. Not because they can't, but because part of them doesn't want to. Here's the real psychological struggle for 90s kids. They don't fully fit anywhere. Too old to relate to Gen Z's digital-first worldview. Too young to connect with older generations who reject technology. Psychologically, this creates what's called generational liminality, being stuck between two worlds. At work, they're expected to keep up with rapid change. But emotionally, they crave the stability they grew up with. They value deep friendships, the kind you build over years. But they live in a world of shallow connections and ghosting. They were raised to believe, work hard, get a degree, get a stable job, buy a house. But that formula doesn't work anymore. So many 90s kids are dealing with burnout from trying to keep up, anxiety about an unpredictable future, a quiet grief for a world that no longer exists. And the hardest part? Nobody really talks about it. Because on the surface, they're fine. They adapted. They survived. But inside, there's this low-level exhaustion from constantly bridging two worlds that don't speak the same language. Here's the truth about people who grew up in the 90s. They're resilient, creative, patient. They can thrive in both the old world and the new. But they're also tired. Tired of adapting. Tired of being the bridge. If you're a 90s kid, give yourself credit. You grew up in one world and built a life in another. That's not easy, and it's okay to feel the weight of it. If this resonated, share and subscribe to Mind Peace, because understanding yourself is the first step to peace.